Hey, hello everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. This is welcome back to the series of somatic psychotherapy and non-duality. And this is Mihai Algiu, and is my guest Scott Kiloby. Welcome, Scott. And so, yeah, thank you for coming over and over and sharing here after sharing a lot on your YouTube channel and Facebook. You are like a inspiration, like a powerhouse of of wisdom and practical information. Well, just for the context, this is like a room where we are looking at these themes of combining teachings about enlightenment, presence, witnessing, waking up, non-duality, and combining all of these teachings or applying these teachings with the need for subconscious work, awareness-based somatic processing, and processing trauma, addiction, repression. So these two worlds of somatic psychotherapy and awakening, they meet. And we both agreed that somehow both they need each other. You know, doing one without the other is a little bit lopsided, and it seems like it's going to get stuck either in transcendence, la la land, or stuck in the vaults and hooked into some personal me. So, all right, how about we tackle today this topic that has been on the minds and hearts of therapists from the very beginning. At the same time, it seems like you are making major discoveries right now. This topic of repression. I remember vaguely that even our grandfather, great-grandfather, like Freud, he was focusing somehow on that, and he was causing a lot of psychological dysfunction and problems to kind of repressed feelings from childhood. And also as therapy developed, a lot of experiential, emotional focused modalities, they are kind of getting into trying to bring those pockets of pain, body, or unfelt, unexpressed things out. You know, I myself, in the earlier days, I went all this kind of psychodrama, gestalt, group work, or where we'll just get into it. And, you know, we had all this like in a theater performance. We had like baseball bats, and we had things we can strangle or we can tear down, and people were shouting. So, you know, that was pretty impactful for me, and this kind of relief of expressing. Anyway, so but looking back, I can see that was a few events like that, and it felt like a high and cathartic. But at the same time, I will go back to still good boy pattern, peacemaker pattern, still kind of not speaking up. So it seems like that gave a little dent in this thing, but it seems like it needed more. But before we go any further, can we talk a little bit about this, let's say the difference between repression and suppression? Like, I think suppression is like, you know, my boss pisses me off, or I mean, not my real boss, my boss is wonderful, but my boss is pissing me off, and I'm not going to express it because it's not appropriate. So I'm going to intentionally, I know I'm holding this back. Yeah, this is suppression. Now, repression, from what I hear from you, is that we are not even aware this is happening. And this is very tricky. So can we go into talking about this, the nature of repression, and then how it starts and what is its function? Because initially it's helpful, I guess. Can we go a little bit into some context about this mechanism of repression, why and how?
For me, if you go back to when Scott was a little kid, because in inquiry that would come up is me in my family environment, and also me in my extended family environment, because we can work with that in inquiry, like bringing up those scenarios. And I never could pinpoint, like with the suppression, you might pinpoint some decision where you go, okay, this is not something that I want to deal with. I need to push this, compartmentalize it or something. Um, but for me, this repression thing is more cunning, because when I look back at those memories, I don't see that decision being made anywhere. All that I see is a kid who believes that it's like it was so connected to my personality structure, the repression, that I couldn't pull them apart. For me, being a peacemaker was how I survived. I kept quiet. I got love that way. And then just noticing that in order to do that, I was repressing anger. And even when I got to an adult, I mean, even being on the spiritual path, I said, "Where's my anger?" So again, I wasn't even aware of it, frankly, until I started using these inquiries. I wasn't aware of how it was operating as part of my structure of my personality. It seemed to go hand in hand with my ego identities, which may be different for other people. But I think that's what I'm finding is that their survival strategies and they're closely associated with personality. So they're so close. This is the way I use, like, they're so close, you just can't see it. You can't see it when it's happening. But it doesn't feel like it was a conscious decision of any kind. That I'm aware of. I've not found that decision. It's more like a mechanism happening as connected directly to those identities.
Yes, interesting. I have the same experience. Also, it could be that we are raised in a family environment and the child consciousness is absorbing patterns existing with the caretakers. Is some osmosis happening. So if, personally, I was raised in a totalitarian, communist regime that was, unsafe. And so if my father needed to repress and suppress things, and then he's just walking about and I'm watching my father, and that's the way to go. So I'm kind of getting this transmission, I guess, of shut down, frozen. Well, in terms of my philosophy working with people is, so we are here as open, child, golden child, and then the environment is less than ideal. It's unloving or violent or unstable. That's a ouch, some hurt, some message. And then we have this great ability to adapt, I guess, to resilience, to resilient, adapt to the environment as a strategy to survive. And I think I heard you say this, repression as a strategy to survive. So can we go into maybe some of the strategies or utilities of that, somehow how it served us and how it doesn't serve us now,
Yeah. The strategies for me, they were things like, well, this is how I get love, like in this family. Like, if being quiet, being a peacemaker is, I literally got love that way. And I continue to get love and approval from people who would look at me and say, "Aren't you a nice guy? You're a really nice guy." And then you get rewarded too along the way. You're peaceful, you're nice, I like hanging out with you, you're a good listener. So it gets rewarded. And then there's just a learning that happens where it's like, oh, this is my personality, this is how I get love and approval. And it just continues and continues and continues. And we can't see things until we go back into inquiry or some process where, so for example, when I went in the school library in that moment of hiding from bullies, I was conscious for a long time of the memory of that and some of the identities around it, but I wasn't conscious how in that moment it all happened under the radar, that there was something decided in my mechanism that I cannot express fear. I have to hide. I cannot express anger. So that's what's tricky about this, and why I think it gets hidden from us, is because whereas you can pinpoint an event, you can say, well, in fourth grade, I was bullied, and then this story came from it. It's not so easy to pinpoint. Again, the place at which we do this. And it isn't easy to pinpoint then what we're getting out of it because it's so close to our structure or personality. So again, the moment in time of when I began to repress, it didn't just show up in inquiry naturally. I had to pull it up to see what was I believing at that
Yeah.
point in time. What did I believe? And then just watching how unconscious, like you say, the utilities are, because being rewarded, getting love, getting approval. I mean, literally repressing anger gave me almost all the utilities that we see. I got love, I got approval, protected myself, safety, I survived. So when you got all those utilities going for you, there's a lot of reasons not to do this work, like not to do the repression work if you've lived that long being rewarded in certain ways around it. That's where it gets challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it seems like there's their beliefs. So the repression is a phenomena that is happening. And so also, just for the record, what are we repressing? Let's say I repress expression of anger, I repress, or this was a subconscious, unconscious. So this was happening. I wasn't aware of it. That was modeled to me, or I was safer, or I'll get more love for that. Repress needs, expressing needs. Yeah, it's not not asking for what I want. Repressing, fear. There's this male program. I remember that working a lot of men, and in men's work, many people reported this, like their fathers would say, well, if you're crying, let me give you something to cry for. So if you're crying or distressed, then you're not man enough. So then that just shut that. Sadness, if also the parents are uncomfortable with their own feeling, they will be uncomfortable with child's feeling, fear, sadness, anger,
Boundaries.
enthusiasm. Yeah, boundaries. Yeah, not to put boundaries, not to put, because then if I were to put boundaries, I have to speak up, right? And I like what you were
or if you're in the non-dual talk, setting a boundary would be like, well, what boundary? There's no separations. You can get, it's a slippery slope either way. See that boundary thing.
Yes, it's some kind of spiritual non-dual mind fuckery. Yeah. Also, you were mentioning it's not just, it's also repression of joy, repression of, as you are a child and you are like excited about something creative, and sometimes there was no space for that, or there was messy for the adults. Say, put that back there, there's no time for that. Or repression of expression of love, of affection. So, and ultimately, authenticity. I think I had the video recently. I think this is very connected. This unconscious repression, it's a repression of authenticity. Authenticity as like, not as a new agey, hey, be authentic, but of the natural yeses and the no. Yeah. So any thoughts on this?
Yeah, because for me, it's like going into the non-dual, you see that there isn't really a self, like a thing that we're like a self that's repressing, but you can see that the self, what we call a self, is made up of all these different things, like the ability to speak, feeling, thought, setting boundaries, whatever the thing is. So for me, it's like, I don't think of it like in self-repression. I don't think of it as like a solid self. It's like a mechanism that represses based on what it can get. Like you repress in order to get something, or to protect yourself, or like you say, modeling after your parent. So that's why I see how you could be repressing one thing and maybe not another, because in doing that, that's how your personality structure came about. Just some people repress anger more, for example, and other people really don't. And for example, if you have like a very cold and distant mother, the expression of love and affection might be the thing, that aspect of your consciousness where something else might not be repressed. But as you brought up, if you're repressing one, you might want to look at the other areas because they hide from us. Like we might say, oh yeah, of course, anger repression, but it would not occur to us to like joy repression. Or so just we do a little litmus test as we do, just going around to see where we might be repressing these things. But the people in the non-dual world, they'll say, well, sometimes they'll say, well, there's no self. So, like, there's no self to repress. But I said, but if we look at it differently, of course, that's true in our experience when we recognize that. But that doesn't mean that repression doesn't happen just
Yeah.
because there's no self, but the mechanism still happens.
Yeah. Yes. It's yeah, it's happening by itself. Just like it's like the ego, there's no ego, but it's egoing. It's an activity. Remember this guy, Paul Hederman, had this term. He didn't want to use ego. He called it selfing.
Yeah.
Selfing is the activity of identifying all these things. So there's like repression is happening. Yeah. And yeah, if you can, I talk about this litmus test. I remember that I tried it on myself with bringing a family of origin, and yeah. Can you, if it's okay, to speak about the litmus test, just to notice if we have any corrupt codes around that, and how to even check.
So it is pretty simple. And what I try to do first with people is have them pull up all the important people in their life. So because it's in the relationships where we do this. And so you don't want to do the test, like we say, in midair, where you're not looking at relationship. So you pull up the main players, mom, dad, siblings, other authority figures that are important from childhood, relationships, current, past, important relationships, to build a little panorama of people. And then, because if there's a repression, it should show up somewhere in those relationships. So you start with like anger, and one way to do it is just feel in. Here's the thing: is what I found about these repressions, they do hide, obviously. So if we're looking at this from like a disembodied awareness, but we're not connecting into the body, I find that it hides. So before the litmus test starts, I would say, if you're feeling a certain area, like pain or contraction, where there might be something hidden there, you have some clue about it, feel into that. And then at the same time, look at all these people so that you have all the elements up that would be needed to be there for it to come up. Because if you take some of those elements away, I've actually seen in session, like if someone doesn't feel into an area, it's like they'll look at dad and say, yeah, I mean, I don't see a big thing there. But as soon as feeling into that area, it's like, oh yeah, I could not show fear to dad. So having all that up, and then starting with, for example, anger, I can feel and show anger directly to all of them, or to any of or all of them. And then just kind of perusing or turning towards and energetically feeling into where there's a no, even if you don't know exactly what it's saying, like trust your body where it's going. And then if you get a no, I couldn't express anger anywhere, you just mark a little box, like just make a note. Okay, we'll come back to that. Now let's do the same thing with the other things. I could feel and show fear to everyone. I could feel, and then again, checking box, always feeling into the body. I can feel and show guilt, or I feel guilty around something, because sometimes it'll be like an event, but we can't make contact with the feeling of guilt, although we think that we feel guilty. So just feeling into the body and looking at that person and saying, I feel no guilt, because sometimes it's just like we don't feel it. So even before expressing it, because I don't know if guilt is the same in terms of expression, but to be able to feel it. And then despair, sadness, grief, all the primary emotions that you find on Google, just Google the primary emotions. And then you might want to look at areas like, for me, just being a songwriter and artist, like I can create, I can feel and create, or anything I want. I can express anything I want artistically. There's another area. Or for me, there was a gender expression issue growing up in Midwest, United States, where in the 80s, where you're lucky if you could even come out of the closet to be gay, let alone talk about some sort of gender expression that doesn't fit into the binary. So all my life is just like checking out that box, like, oh yeah, I'm a man. But when I actually go into inquiry, one of the things that I had to repress to survive was this feminine part of me, the creative, what I would call the feminine part of me, the nurturing part, the whatever that is. And then bringing that online, like seeing if that's there. So I'll take people through, I can feel and express the feminine side of me or the masculine side. So a lot of times I thought it was just like something about being gay, but I work with all these heterosexual men, for example, and they feel the repression of the feminine. It's not allowed. It's, you're not a man, you're weak. So it's interesting to do that for everybody to kind of check into that. There's also the repression of sexual orientation. Those things get repressed. So just pick those up. Joy, love. I may be missing some things, but kind of just going around the whole of
Yeah.
anything that you could repress and touching into things specifically so that they don't hide. If you don't ask about specifically, it just kind of might hide from you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I heard you in a video putting the same litmus test, like I can bring the family of origin and say I can feel joy in this family. I could be and express sadness in this family. So it was very interesting to me because I was raised from 0 to 6 somewhere and from 6 onwards somewhere else. I did it with both. It was very interesting. I could do in one context, I would get like, yes, yes, yes. And it was like, I felt like love and safe. And then I go to the other context, it was like, no, not even joy, not even, love, excitement. Although, they were good parents, educated, not putting me down, not being nasty, like really loving parents. But somehow there's also the cultural context, the pressure, it was interesting. Anyway, and then I tried also to try the same thing, like now, let's say, not going to the past, look at the panorama now, and I would do this, and it will come also like yes, 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 which giving me like the information as if, hey, now it's not a problem, and now I'm kind of free and authentic. But I just realized something actually by attending your weekly meeting just before this, is that yeah, I am free and authentic. However, in a bonded partnership, it will bring up, the bonded partnership will evoke the setting of from the family. So there it will come, all the, in a bonded partnership, in a relationship, it will evoke the unresolved wounds from the family of origin. So I could see it's still very helpful to go back to the family of origin and kind of start to bring to awareness these things that were hidden.
You just said some really two insightful things that I don't want to skip over. I want to make sure everybody's just heard that, because just because we have a current clarity around something, being able to express something currently, doesn't mean that there's not an imprint. And so what I think is the value of going back to the earlier relationships where we couldn't is partly because we're storing that in the body. So that's my showing up now as contraction or something else, illness, chronic pain. So you have to be careful with doing this, because I've seen it many times with clients where they'll say, yeah, no, I feel like I can express to my friends pretty much anything. And I'm like, but what is your body holding on to with regard to the past? So if people don't make the connection, because in non-duality, they'll say, some teachers will say, don't bother with going back. But if your body's holding that imprint, you would want to go back, because that's part of the awakening process, is holding on to this stuff here. So that was a good thing that you said, like your current clarity is not the indication of what you're holding on to. Yes. And then the other thing is, you said like these bonded relationships, really important point, because a lot of times we see that the same patterns that we were doing with mom and dad are showing up, especially in bonded romantic relationships, but other ones that are close. And so if you're not tuned into that, you might miss that, how that's showing up. And then going into inquiry around both, because the imprint is from the past with parents, but it's showing itself again and again in relationships, and likely will continue. So being able to go and do inquiry on each of those people, but really starting with, of course, mom and dad are spending a lot of time there because it originated there, as far as we know. Yeah, so those are good 2 points I didn't want people to just miss.
Yes. Yeah, I had some good points of your points here. Oh yeah, so I find it actually useful, and I encourage people who are interested in this kind of deprogramming from these imprints. Actually, it's very useful to bring the partner, because that will evoke the childhood material, and even do things like I can be vulnerable, I can be fully honest with her or him. I can be real. I can express. So there it will come for me this some no's. Although if I were to do it like general with people in my life, it will come as yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, I want to piggyback on something you said. It's very important. One of the principles of awareness-based somatic processing, which is this mind-body connection. I mean, mind-body connection is like mind-body is one. It's not that there's a connection. It's like one. And somehow to when there is some the difficult thought, to kind of, as we witness it, to see where is the energy in the body, where is the contraction, localization, and the other way around too. There is some contraction, localization. There is surely a thought form in it. So the need to go from the thought form to the bodily localization of energy, or from the localization to see what thoughts are hiding in it. And so that's very important. And of course, this is not like conversational. You are on a sofa with a therapist and conversational. This requires a special state of, special state meaning not just be talking, but go inside, be in a witnessing space, and keep doing this back and forth. And actually, by bringing the panorama, I found out, let's say, before going into processing with clients, just bringing the girlfriend up. So can you bring the girlfriend up, or bring mom up, look at her, and allow any images connected to her. And then tune, see what reactions are in the body. Just doing that, it will, evoke, basically to deepen awareness, to access the material. So it's not just mental.
Yeah, and for some reason, I'm drawn to talk after you said that about why I think that so many of us on the path struggle with embodiment, because at that level, it's showing up. A lot of this old stuff is showing up again, not as emotion that's obvious. Like it's not like it's coming up as it was, it's contraction, tightness, pain, chronic pain, even. So that's a good example right there of talking about it that way, of how it's hidden itself from us. When you talked about mind-body connection, I think that's how it hides in one way or the other. So again, so many people are coming to me that have been to satsang after satsang, retreat after retreat, or even therapy, where they've not discovered, for example, the unconscious thoughts holding a contraction together. So they're aware in the body, but unconscious to the mind. And then that explains to me part of the reason why they're stuck in the somatic, like, because they just haven't discovered that. Or the other is true, which is you may not know how certain things are held in your body. If you're not tuned into the body, you might not connect that this particular story is held in the stomach. Yeah. But when you start to be aware of that, like you say, mind-body connection, it's more than that. They're just one mechanism.
Yeah.
Then when you start to become aware of both those, like mind and body, I feel like you're in the place where the embodiment can really happen, and the bypassing can stop or slow down a lot. But until you get both of those online, you can see where it can just hide from us in different ways.
Yes.
And I think that explains why a lot of people are getting stuck, even after realization, sometimes getting stuck, not able to access this mind-body thing.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I was taught in this Hakomi, modality, which is very somatic, awareness-based. So this was right there, but somehow I was using it, but working with you, somehow it got more clear. So this is unpaid commercial, but yeah, it became much more clear. And so now I'm really, if I'm exploring with someone or with myself some, let's say, some type of thought form, something. We explore that, witness that, do the utility on that, and then I'm asking the person, okay, so what's happening in your body? And then we go into the body, and then if it's contracted, try and find ways to kind of go beyond the contraction and let it open it up more. And then then I go back, okay, what are any thoughts there? You know, there's the tight fist in your gut. Okay, stay with it, let it be there. And if he were to say something, what would he say? Any thoughts, any image? Then we go back to the thoughts and the image, explore that. And then what's happening in the body? And it's interesting is that loosens up the body. So once we bring out, milk out the mental content out of certain localized energy, that loosens up that. Yeah, so these are some important principle of kind of thorough investigation of the, I guess, psychosomatic structure.
Yeah, and it occurs to me also, like on the non-dual path, where if some of that processing isn't invited by a tradition or a teaching, and instead there's some other things get told, like there's even some stuff that gets passed down, like, well, why even bother with some of that? Because there's no self, or those are just arisings. And that to me is a missed opportunity right there. So that's why I like doing these interviews with
Yeah.
you, because being in the therapy world and understanding the value of processing, you're not going to say something like that. You're going to be open to it. But I can see people listening to this that might have certain objections because of the tradition that they're in and not understanding. And I think part of why we're doing this interview is to talk about the wisdom of being aware of mind, body, and processing it. It's not just coming back to awareness or dismissing phenomena all the time.
Yeah.
We said that before, but like when you just explain that, I can see how somebody would go, well, I don't want to really do all that, like checking the body. But the thing is what I find is if you don't, eventually, I don't want to say this as a rule, but it'll catch up with you, on the path. If you're on a spiritual path, it will catch up on you.
Yeah.
Your lack of awareness of these areas in some ways will manifest in the body or continue to be a behavioral issue or issues in relationships or chronic pain for me. So it's like all roads in the end lead back to it. And even if we try to ignore it, after a while we do. And it makes a lot of sense because we're waking up. It's like, well, of course, if we're waking up, then why would I want to be asleep to certain aspect of my experience? But somehow that argument gets perpetuated that isn't important. But then, well, what is waking up? Are we just waking up and just dismissing everything, like all phenomena? Well, I don't know how awake one would be, because you can't separate the phenomena at first. The phenomena and awareness are happening together. So to me, the only way out would be through that. And if I'm trying to get around it by ignoring certain things, there will be some sort of, almost in every case for me, there's been some sort of ramification in my life, whether it's, again, back to doing the same patterns in a relationship that I did when I was a kid or whatever else.
Yeah. Yeah, there are teachings, non-dual teachings that are more somatic informed. I don't know if there are many non-dual teachings which are trauma informed, but they're somatic informed. And I don't know from where I got this, but there's this idea that here, from here to the belt is like the frontal line. And this is where's the emotional body, where we have emotions and feelings somehow. And this is probably has correspondent in like a chakra energy system and neuronal brains in all this area. But here we have our feelings. So, and I tell people, like when I start working with people, so some little education on that, because it's not taught. I mean, it's not taught. Basically, these feelings we call, let's say, sadness, loneliness, despair, shame, stress, anxiety, loneliness. All of these are words. This is some word, like the word oak tree or iron. It's words, but they refer to an actual energy in the body. There's actually some energy in the body. So from one angle, it's good to be able to label it. There were some tests that if somebody is flooded or overwhelmed or confused, I don't know what's happening, to be able to to be like, oh, I'm sad. To say this sad, this somehow does something to the brain, so it's a little more manageable. So this is a preliminary level, but at some level, it's good to drop the sad and to go into, okay, where is this so-called sad? Let's not call it sad. It's here, and there's a heaviness, and there is this energy, and there's a story in it. Oh, she's gone. Oh, she's gone. There's unsaid important word in it,
Yeah, that's an interesting way you just explained that, because to be body aware like that, many of us are not, like, until we are, and to be aware that, like, the word sadness has a correlate in the body. It's like there's an actual energy. And gosh, that's really important to get started on this path. And I think if you can do that early with people, or if people can pick that up early where they're tuning into their body, then some of this later work is easier or more accessible if from the very beginning you can help people like that, just to connect with what they're feeling in their body. Because as you know, we go much deeper into that. And what was neat about what you just did there is that if I'm up here in a story of sadness and I'm identified with it, and I haven't found the correlate, the energy, I might miss that opportunity that you just said, which is, if I can find the correlate and be with the energy, then I can discover what that's really about. And so you can't always do that if you're coming up from up here, not connecting down there and asking those questions. Just gets missed.
Yes. And it was inspired by, going back to this, looking at the family. So look at the family of origin, or look at these people. This is like in the mind's eye, and feel into the tension and say, I'm worthy of love, so having all these components to get, I guess, maximum extraction of unconscious material.
Yeah, it's a good way to say it.
It's from you, so I'm just, it's, I find it very useful, very effective, because it could be a tendency to also do this KI a little mental. Okay, what's this thought? What do you get by believing this? Okay, I don't believe this. So it's can get a little like that, which still can be very useful at some level of cognitive therapy. Become aware of these thoughts and stuff. It's still useful, but it's meant for much more.
Yes, much more goes deeper that way.
So, coming back to this somatic informed non-duality, I recently attended some, let's say, satsang-like context with some wonderful teachers, actually. And then in those teachings, there was this thing like, there is the sense of lack. There's knowledge in the teaching that there is the sense of lack, there's the fear, there is stuff in the body, and people talk about somatic yuckiness. People talk about somatic yuckiness, and the teacher it tells them to not be afraid of it, to fully let it be there, let it devour you. This is interesting. It's not not useful if people have trauma activation, but for somebody who is more stable and can sustain, that works, to witness it, to let it be there. But I was a little disappointed, because I hear this student saying, hey, I don't know, I have this thing in my chest, it keeps happening, and then it's like terror. And then the person was in a war or a fireman, and then saying, hey, I get this, but I have this thing in the chest, and it's scary, and it's like contraction. And then the teacher gives them great instructions to, hey, it's okay, welcome it, let it be there, witness it, stay as what you are. And I'm like, dude, there's trauma there. I mean, I didn't say anything, but this is some thoughts there. There's a memories. There's a file there, and if I just do what he said, I'm just skim through the file. It's not going to be resolved. It's going to go away, but it's going to keep coming back up. So yeah, I can see there's not a lot of knowledge of that. Then I went to I have a supervisor and a wise therapist boss, and I told him that I was like disappointed about this, and he said, every teacher teaches how they succeeded, and maybe this teacher of mine, he didn't have to do that. It was different karma, different path, and then Scott or you have to go into all that, and so I could see I could totally absolve that teacher. And I don't know, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, but it's not just you and me, because one of the things I've been able to do, like you, is I work with people one-on-one and have for like 15 years. It's not just you and me, that this is an across the board thing. I don't really blame teachers because everybody's doing the best they can. I'm doing the best that I can. You are too, period. So, but how do I say this? The thing I want to say about that scenario, you already said it, which is when we're talking about this, if we're not aware of what's unconscious, what the programming is inside of a sensation, what we're asking people to do is literally to bypass it, because there's identification in there, but the teacher is saying, well, just see that there's no self, it's not happening to anyone, let it devour you. But what are we even talking about? What is that? Because the assumption there is that that's just a sensation, but that assumption gets undone as soon as we investigate it and we find there's a lot of stuff in there, old identifications. And then that helps us understand why it was stuck. So then if we find those things in there, it's hard then to go back and say, I'm just going to be with this, or there's no one here, because you've discovered that now. But my point is this is happening all over the world. Like, this isn't just me and you. This is people who need to be met in a deeper way around this stuff. Otherwise, they continue to suffer on the body level. So, yeah, it's common, actually, missing this stuff.
Yeah, no, I meant more like in the teacher spiritual authority realm. Somehow that was a little bit I'm still attending or checking out of interest, and various people that are respected and great teachers, and I can still appreciate them, but I see that there's yeah, I think you mentioned in the recent video that a teacher has a toolbox, and that's what I got. And then there is some stuff that the student has, but the same, those tools, they are too rough, or let's say they are not meant for that. But somehow the teacher comes with what they inherited from the tradition, and they apply the same toolbox. And somehow trauma is outside the scope of awakening somehow, and that's not effective, really.
Right. Well, it just reminds me, like, okay, so you are in the therapy world, you're a clinician, and I'm in that world too, because I have treatment centers. So we had to like adapt to see what other aspects or regions of the world are saying about this, like the West. Whereas some of these teachers, some of them are very aligned with their tradition, as you said, almost to a point of being almost too loyal to it. Because if the tradition has missed things through the years, like it's missing some of the science or missing the trauma-informed perspective or something, then it just misses all of that. But what's dangerous about that is then if the teacher then believes that they have the only path or the one and only way, where it gets a little blinded, that's where I think it gets dangerous. It's one thing to understand that your teaching or your tradition has a limitation. It's another thing to tell people this is the only way or the right way, because then you're leading them astray, literally, if they need to go somewhere else. So we've had the benefit of reading the science, seeing how we talk about it in the West, illuminating these areas like trauma and addiction specifically, and working with those, whereas a certain tradition just might not have that language for that, and they just keep talking about the same things over, and so they miss that stuff.
Yeah, I could see an obstacle towards going there. Even for me, I would see this discrepancy or some missing link, but then because for so long as a seeker and a young man, I worshipped and put on a high pedestal this thing like Ramana and Nisargadatta and the Upanishads and this teacher and that teacher, and somehow because I didn't know and they know, and so even once I knew more about trauma and I could see that something is missing in my my mind will be like, yeah, but you know that somehow Buddha knew, somehow that some kind of putting on a pedestal the teaching as if it's untouchable, and it's almost like a blasphemy to have a problem with it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Out of respect, spiritual respect and reverence.
Yeah, and so if we're going to place some responsibility on the teachers, one of it is if they take the approach that their path or their tradition is the be all end all, that it is the answer to all truth and all suffering, because that's where I think it gets misleading. It's one thing to like your tradition and to trust it. It's another thing to lead people into thinking that it can cover everything, because we now know that that's not true. We're finding out the limitations of these teachings that have been passed on for hundreds of years now. Yeah.
I guess if there is a contraction, which is we have a sense, you know, especially in the frontal line, you know, if it's the frontal line, it's obvious emotional. I mean, for me, it's emotional stuff. Let's say if I have something in the hip and I have something somewhere on the back, it still could be emotional, but it's more, I guess we go with the mind, it's in the back or in the hip and the leg. Oh, it's probably physical, although we know now that it might not be. But if it's definitely here, solar plexus, chest, belly, kind of everybody knows that, hey, this is a feeling here, if there is something like that, that is, it's a contraction or it's a pressure that doesn't reveal itself as a clear emotion, like sad, mad, glad, joy, shame, fear, but it's like that's be assured that there's a file there that contains some thought, a story, a memory, and maybe several thoughts. So that's, I think, our viewers can kind of rest on that. I have seen this over and over again. And so in order to be free from it, which is tricky, because if I want to be free from it, I mean, you know, it's already some agenda. I want to get rid of it. It's not so skillful. But if I want to really look into this, somehow we need to find a way to unpack it, the zip-locked file, and let that contraction speak. And I like you have some great methods. In Hakomi, we had this thing, okay, if this burning tightness were to say something, you know, what would it say? And you have other things like that I like a lot. If it's not clear what it is about, right, to pull the panorama of things in my life and say who or what is this about. So we feel into the feeling or sensation, and who or what is this about, right? And this can be done also, I guess you discovered, not just with emotional sensation, but would be worth checking into bodily ailments.
Yes. So I think I could talk about it this way, is that I did what a lot of other teachers do, is that I limited this because of the traditions that I was in, and I didn't open it up to the chronic pain thing. So most people wouldn't go to the doctor, I would think, if they have a contracted heart or a stomach. Like, as you say, they probably recognize that it's emotional. But so then I recognized that and was helping people with that, like come down and do this work, as you're saying. But then because of my conditioning and trusting the Eastern traditions, I just put chronic pain out here into this other category. But then exploring it, reading the science, but also exploring it, I found that, okay, the same stuff is often active there. So being able to open myself up to understand the limitations of what I was doing in my own practice and with other people, and then try to adjust to that instead of coming back and saying, you know, this is the only way. Like, I've already figured it out. Don't worry about. Like, happy to be open to more discovery instead of being closed around this. And I just stumbled upon that. I'm happy Dr. John Sarno helped, but like, it's amazing that all of that stayed out of my consciousness. The possibility that this chronic pain stuff was still emotional repression and trauma. It just, because of how I was conditioned, I guess I grew up just like so many do in the West, where it's like, this is all spiritual, emotional, mental, and then this is physical. So that's an example right there of,
Yeah.
we're learning, aren't we? We're learning as we go, and we need to remain open, because we don't have all, there's no teacher in the world that has all the answers about any of this.
Yes, and it's wonderful that you are, you know, honest, being honest and real, and hello, yeah, and owning the limitation of the method. And also, I like your you shone light on. Oh yeah, I think before I met you a long time ago, you had the video when the video was about, hey, be careful about spiritual teachers, and then you went and you said, okay, just going to be silent, and you looked into the camera, and then I was like, oh yeah, okay, I was looking at you, I was like, yeah, man, I can feel it. And then you said, okay, what happened? And you said, nothing, I'm just looking here. And I could see how I was projecting all these things, and so I appreciate how you also shone light on this tendency to mummify and daddify the spiritual teacher and project, I guess, unmet needs, to project all that we didn't have on this teacher, now this ideal mommy and daddy, and so that's, yeah, and I think that's it's very important, because otherwise I guess it maintains the deficiency story in the seeker. Seems like it's the responsibility of a mature teacher to do that, right?
I think so, because there's a two-way dynamic there. There's the student who may be projecting things on the teacher, which makes the student blind to the possibility that the teaching has some limitations. So they're not going anywhere else. They're just, so there's that way. And then coming from the teacher, if they're tied to their traditions and the limitations of that, and they're saying that this is the be all end all, they're sending some signal to the person that their projections are correct. See, that I am the one. And so locked in that relationship is somehow an inability to evolve on both sides because of the projection going both ways. To me, it is a responsibility of the teacher, because they're sitting in the position of having traversed some of this for themselves. So you should be able to recognize that in a student when they're doing to you what they did to mom and dad. And it is your responsibility, because they're right in the middle of that and they can't see it. Who else is going to help them with it? It's your responsibility, because you're the one that they're projecting it on. So there's nobody else that can do it, really. You have to do it as a teacher.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, otherwise it's also tricky. It's the utility on the subconscious payoff for the teacher. And I guess depending of their self-honesty, there's the juice of specialness, there's the adoration, and love. And so if everybody loves me and thinks that I'm so amazing, I'm really probably special. So there's some separation comes back again there, and it's juicy and sticky and tempting.
Yes. And I think a lot of teachers wouldn't admit that. So even if it's operating, they wouldn't admit it to other people, or maybe even to themselves. But I saw that early on in teaching, when that strand of unlovability was still there somewhat, and I was getting something out of the way with people. And I left teaching for a number of years for that, trying to figure that piece out. And then coming back now, it feels like much clearer, but I still have to be aware of how that can pop in, because old patterns can arise.
I appreciate it with Francis, because anyway, in the first beginnings, I ended up in a spiritual community that the teacher, I could see later, much later, that the teacher wasn't. He had a lot of blind spots, let's put it like this, and that was creating problems for himself and others. And in that community, there was this strong specialness of the teacher, and everybody else was much less. And so, and that was condoned, and that was anyway, I left that, and coming back to Francis, I really appreciated how, let's say, you'll go to satsang and there will be 50, 80 people, and if you didn't know who the teacher was, you couldn't see. He didn't have a special beard, didn't have a special pillow, didn't have a special throne. And I really appreciate the being so regular, and also I appreciate with him when sometimes people give him praise and they're like, he just doesn't say anything at all. And sometimes when people really, they give him more and they say how wonderful, he's like, sweetheart, I'm just another guy like you. I fuck up. I take traffic tickets. I make mistakes. I'm stupid, sweetheart. We are the same. It was really, wonderful, and a breath of fresh air. I guess especially in the West, I don't know, in the East, there can be a cultural, with the touching and the kissing the feet and all that. And I respect it, but it's tricky for us here to go into that.
It is tricky. I would imagine it would be somewhat tricky for them too, even different cultures, if they have some of the same stuff that we do with mom and dad, that would still, even if you're in the path, it still can be sticky. But if you're not in the devotional path, you can see how that could be sticky. But in the devotional path, a big part of it is the devotion to the guru is part of the path. And so those folks do take sometimes big objection to what we're saying. And they'll say that devotion, but at still the same time with devotion, at some point, it has to come back to your direct experience. You can't be devoted forever to a teacher. And the teacher will say, okay, but you're devoted ultimately to what you are. That's the ultimate devotion. But that points back to it still has to come onto your side. So whatever patterns we're operating to mommify or dadify that teacher at the end have to be deconstructed, or you're going to continue to give your power away for decades more. So even on the devotional path, at some point, you've got to face the fact that this is operating, and to have your direct experience, you've got to stop doing that.
The object of worship is a temporary object. It has to be a temporary object, even on the devotional path. And I think they say somewhere that the Shnani and the Bhakti, the path of higher knowledge and the path of devotion, ultimately they need to meet, because even on the non-dual, let's say, Shnani, higher knowledge path, one needs to be devoted to the process or to the truth or something,
Yeah. I like that, because we all need that, don't we? Whether we devotion to the process, that's a good thing. But when you devote yourself to a person, that's where it becomes mom and dad can come in right there.
Yes.
And just one little story too is like, one of my teachers is Greg Good, but he's more like a friend. But for 2 years, I worked with him. And when I met with him in New York City, there were some people that had followed both of our teachings who came to eat with us. And they were surprised because all we talked about was like drag queens and Bigfoot. And so people love that, to just see that we're not holding ourselves out as specialness. It's just like very down to earth, and people like that. And more of that would be good for people, so that they do see that we're actually just people. Like everybody is just a guy or a girl, a woman.
Yes. I also had this go to some of the first retreats with Francis, and although I was more mature and less projecting, but anyway, we'll be five people sitting at people at table, and then Francis comes, pulls a chair from a big stack by himself, and I was like, whoa. Usually my other teachers, everybody would serve them. So pulls a chair, sits on a corner, and I'm becoming silent. I'm like, okay. But everybody there, they kept talking, and they start talking about cars and engines. And it was very somehow refreshing. This deep pedestalizing the guru.
And this ties into everything we're talking about, because when we get to this place on the path where we have to go deep into the somatic, what we find a lot is that we've given our power away, to our parents. For example, we repress stuff, give our power away. So that's why it's so relevant to what we're talking about, because as you see that projection happening towards a person, that's a lot like what you were doing, or something like we were doing. And that might actually feed into the repression, because you haven't come into your own power yet. So I think even if you have to kind of deal with it at some point, when you get down to, I can trust myself and my own experience here, you know, and then that's where it comes in. No, I can't, because I can't be angry. I can't say this. I can't. So that's where I think the two things we're talking about do come together here.
Yeah. I'm aware we went veered off from the repression, but I guess, you know, part of the principles of, they say, the somatic psychotherapy, besides mind body as one, it's organicity. So you want to go with it, you know. Yeah, interesting talking about this still with that although I was feeling pretty authentic and normal with Francis, there was still this element of a little quiet and reserved for me. And I could see that, you know, that's how I was with my dad.
Yeah.
You know, with my dad, I was like there quiet and not I don't know, there was like nothing to say, and so it took quite a bit of exposure and him kind of being silly and stuff, you know, but each time when I go again, there's a little, like with my dad, you know. Also, I want to ask you something. Yeah, I have a client very strong on a spiritual path and devoted, honestly, and, you know, also a little bit of bhakti. But there started to be, and I've seen it with other people, there start to be strong feelings of resentment, hatred, aggression towards the teacher. Strong feelings of that. And then I could see that, man, this is not about them. It's more like somehow, it's really about something about their unmet needs and with the mother and father. So do you have you seen that, or any suggestions how to kind of really unpack this and come back to to where's the real work, or how to unvelcro that?
Well, we can't absolve all the teachers of anything that they're doing. So if they're doing something that's inappropriate, that has to be dealt with. But a lot of the triggers are like that. They're transference from parents. And it's almost like our mind is looking for a reason to bring someone down, because for whatever reason, you know, that happens. But see, the thing is being triggered on the teacher or putting that on is like perfect, isn't it? Because if you can go into that, you'll see where it comes from. But if you don't, and you keep thinking, oh, it is the teacher, it's like, then that's repeating the pattern, keeping you blind. So everything's an opportunity, and that would be too, whether you're projecting positive things or negative things, it's an opportunity to pull that back and look at that, where it comes from.
I can see in this men's work that where I'm not dealing with enlightenment or non-duality, but still there's very powerful processes. They had this process called a charge, to clear a charge. And this is in those group work, there were like 50 people or 60 or 30 people. They wouldn't like to go deeper work unless it's clean the container. So we didn't want to have a charge meaning like I'm pissed, judgment, withhold, connected to someone here. So we wanted to clear that before going deeper, or before having participants coming to the container, you know. But anyway, that process was to imagine the person you have charge, or if you can do it with him, facilitate it, and then intentionally bring out data, what happened, you know, data as like what the camera would agree, not interpretations, like he came, he said this, he turned around. Anyway, then to intentionally allow judgments, although it's hard for spiritual people to allow judgments, you know, but to say, no, you are selfish, you are a piece of shit, you know, allow all of these judgments and look into feelings, and then to be okay, these judgments, these feelings towards this person, is this somehow familiar? Who does this reminds you of? Who do you see behind this person? And then the person will be like, oh yeah, I see my aunt, I see this, I see that. So I guess that will be a good way to milk and bring up all the upsetness about the teacher and see who is behind it, and then maybe leave the teacher and then go there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very valuable work. People leave our training program just for that. We kind of say it early in the training program is that people leave either because of deficiency stories or trauma resurfacing. So they can't see it. Even though we have modalities that meet that, that blinds them in that moment. But if we do the training early on and we tell people like, well, this Enneagram type tends to leave because of this story, like they think, okay, unsafety comes up or this one comes up. And then if you can tell people that and then also illuminate with them and help them see where they've reacted to authority in the past, or if you get some of that down early in training, it is easier for people to see it when it comes up. But if you don't, and you've given them no context for that, it may be hard for someone to see. They may really believe it when it's coming up. So that's why we try to talk about it early on, because it's so blinding when it happens that you can easily believe your thoughts. And then that's another way of kind of sabotaging, because if this is a method or whatever it is that's helping you, then you're sabotaging your way out of it. So it's important to talk about that to me early on before it happens, some sort of education about it or plan around it if it happens. And what we're trying to get better at in our training program is helping to identify it when it might come up, the kinds of situations where it might come up, and then what do we do when it comes up. So even in training, some people will devise plans. So the plan might involve the facilitator has to inquire if they're involved in the countertransference or something, and the person looks at it, and then, or maybe they go to look at it with a different facilitator. So there's like a process there so they can at least discern whether they're leaving from just some trauma or they're leaving for a better reason, which is maybe the modality just doesn't work for them anymore or something. But it's hard to see that when you're triggered on something.
Yeah. How are you on time?
I do have to go in a few minutes because I have a session and I just remembered actually. Yeah.
Oh wow, you've been for a few hours. Okay, well maybe it's a good time to stop here, and and so once again I want to refer to Scott's website for sessions with him or with his facilitators, because what we are talking here is ultimately meant to be done on one's own, but honestly it's not going to work unless you do it with someone for some time in order to do this work on one's own. So that's really my honest truth. And also Scott has some weekly support meetings Saturday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. You can go on his site, where he supports people doing this psychosomatic work, repression work, but also in particular connected to chronic pain ailments and how to unpack the psycho-emotional trauma-related causes of physical ailments. So I highly recommend that. And also, I guess a brief reminder, Scott is going to come here in California to my town, Nevada City, and we are going to do 2 events on November 13th and 14th, and we'll post this. I'll post this, and will be one event on a Saturday for more like for therapists, practitioners, healers, shamans, hypnotists, anybody that is working with people's subconscious and they are interested to get some tools how to deal with the subconscious, especially awareness-based somatic work. So we'll have an event like that. And then the next day on Sunday, we'll have an event for anybody where it will be a 1-day intensive. And we are both, it's not going to be so much a lecture or dialogue like that. It will be very experiential. And even I believe even with the therapist and the practitioner one, probably it's a good having some theory, but then the best way to kind of to get it is to kind of try it with someone. And do it like that.
Yeah, and so for people who don't know, Nevada City is the town, Nevada City, California, in case somebody wants to come who doesn't know where you are.
Nevada City, California. And also, I haven't talked to you, but maybe we can explore, as maybe with the first training, we can explore the option to have some Zoom attendance as well, maybe it might work with the first one. It will open to many other people and might be valuable. The second one, the intensive, I don't think will work, but we are going to, keep you guys posted.
Great. So where do they go to find that, just in case people watch it on my site? If they want to learn about that workshop, is there a site they can go to?
Yes. So I will create very soon a Facebook event, and I will do a meetup event, and then I can put it on my site, and I can send it to you and put it on your site. And it's not there yet. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, it will be coming up.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Mihai. I appreciate
All
it
right.
again.
God, thank you. All right. Ciao, ciao.